Hello and welcome to Global Lens. Over the next 30 minutes, we put the top spotlight on the top stories from around the world. I'm Parikshit Luthra. These are the global stories we are tracking. Grieving families await answers as investigators comb through the wreckage of the Air India Boeing 787 aircraft, which crashed in Ahmedabad. Aviation Ministry confirms that the recovery of a black box, 241 people confirmed dead and a lone passenger survives. Israel targets Iran's nuclear sites and military leadership in a major attack involving 200 fighter jets. Iran calls it a declaration of war and promises to respond. India expresses deep concern as tensions rise in the region. US President Donald Trump warns of even more brutal attacks if Iran refuses to strike a nuclear deal, warns things will only get worse. This after US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Israel decided unilaterally to strike Iran. Let's go straight to all the market action. Global markets are down after Israel launched attacks on Iran's nuclear sites, mounting fears of a full-blown war. Here's how the Asian markets ended today. India's Nifty fell more than 160 points. Japan's Nikkei and Hong Kong's Hang Seng ended nearly 1% lower. South Korea's Kospi and China's Shanghai Composite Index also recorded losses. It's a similar picture across Europe and the US. Aviation stocks are taking a beating around the world as Israel-Iran tensions led to airspace closures in several nations in the Middle East. Meanwhile, shares of Boeing and engine maker GE Aerospace remained under pressure after the Boeing 787 crash in India. Oil prices surged as Israel's attack sparked supply fears. The US dollar and gold too rallied as investors moved into safe haven assets. Now, here's what we know about the situation in West Asia. The Israeli military launched a wave of strikes against nuclear sites in Iran, also targeting Iran's military leadership. Israel struck the Natanz uranium enrichment plant and has killed 6 nuclear scientists. Iran's top military commanders have been killed, including General Hossein Salami, the head of the Revolutionary Guard. Israel deployed 200 fighter jets, striking over 100 targets in Iran, including many in Tehran as well. The Israeli government also declaring a state of emergency. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu justified the military operation and said it could continue as long as necessary. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei also vowed to take action and threatened that Israel would face severe punishment. Iranian state TV reportedly said residential areas in Tehran were hit and civilians were killed. The state TV also aired footage of Iranians taking to the streets and chanting death to Israel and death to America. Iran has launched about 100 drones against Israel, and the Israeli army says it is working to intercept them. US President Donald Trump has warned Iran to agree on a nuclear deal, saying this could only get worse. This comes after Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Israel acted unilaterally and the US was not involved in the attacks. In a social media post, Trump said there has already been great death and destruction, but there is still time to make this slaughter come to an end. He warned of even more brutal attacks if Iran refuses to strike a nuclear deal, saying things will only get worse. Trump also wrote that he gave Iran a 60-day ultimatum to make a deal, and now the country has a second chance. Meanwhile, other global leaders called for de-escalation in tensions.
The Secretary General condemns any military escalation in the Middle East. He is particularly concerned by Israeli attacks on nuclear installations in Iran, while talks between Iran and the United States on the status of Iran's nuclear program are underway. The Secretary General recalls the obligation of UN member states to act in accordance with the UN Charter and international law. The Secretary General asks both sides to show maximum restraint, avoiding at all costs a descent into deeper conflict, a situation that the region can hardly afford.
Well, it is obviously a rapidly evolving situation. This was a unilateral action by Israel. So I think it is crucial for many allies, including the United States, to work as we speak to de-escalate. I know they're doing that.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to discuss the ongoing situation in West Asia. During the call, Prime Minister Modi emphasized on India's concerns and called for the need to restore early peace and stability in the region. Joining us now to take this forward is Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for joining us on the program, Dr. Parsi. Let me begin by asking you, what are Iran's options at this stage?
Well, it very much depends on what capacity they have left, both in terms of military assets as well as the command and control centers that they have. How much of a hit did that take, mindful of the fact that several of the military leaders were killed in these Israeli strikes? It remains to be seen that the reason why they haven't responded yet beyond some of these drone attacks is whether they are trying to regroup or whether they actually have lost most of their capacity of striking back at Israel.
Right. That indeed is an important point. How do you think Donald Trump is supporting Netanyahu at this point? The U.S. is literally warning them that just do it, just sign a deal before things get worse. Nothing will be left. This seems to be a dire warning from the U.S. president.
Well, I think what Trump has done in the last week, that he completely shifted. Earlier on, I think he was sincerely looking for a deal, and then he shifted and has been essentially supporting what the Israelis are doing, probably with some deep coordination as well. His latest comments and tweets seem to be that he's actually taking credit for these attacks, which may be an exaggeration, but nevertheless, it's very unlikely that the Israelis could have done this without coordination with the US and certainly without some form of a green light. But his idea that this will then cause the Iranians to capitulate, I think, is undermined by the fact that he is essentially signaling that he was deeply involved in deceiving the Iranians into believing that he was serious about diplomacy in the last couple of days, whereas in reality, it gave a cover for the Israelis to attack in a way that surprised the Iranians. Given that, on what basis would the Iranians believe that any effort to capitulate actually would lead to Trump delivering on what he's promising the Iranians if they do capitulate? So I think he's undermining his own prospects of getting the Iranians to back down with the manner that he is taking credit for this.
Right. Do you think that Iranians, considering their pride, will even agree to any kind of nuclear deal, even if things get better in the next few weeks?
I find it very unlikely, but again, it all depends on how much of it has been destroyed and how much of it can be resurrected. And again, that what this starts to look like is not a campaign against the Iranian nuclear program, but a campaign to cause regime collapse in Iran, and causing the entire regime to collapse. Not necessarily regime change, because regime change would mean that the Israelis are actually pushing for an alternative government. They're just pushing for chaos here and making sure that the Iranians don't have any government at all. When that happened in Syria, when the Syrian government fell, that's when the Israelis dramatically increased their bombing campaigns and started taking out all conventional military assets that the Syrians had in order to make sure that whoever would take over Syria afterwards would not be able to pose a challenge to Israel. And much indicates that this is also what they would be seeking to pursue in Iran if they're successful in causing these different attacks to eventually lead to some form of a regime collapse in Iran.
Right. Do you think there is any possibility right now of a full-blown war?
Well, if the Iranians respond and their response ends up being effective, then the idea that this has been so successful for Israel is going to change. And then the Israelis are going to start pushing the US to actually get openly involved in the war. And that would likely lead to a conventional regional war in the sense that in that scenario, again, if the Iranians retain that capacity, the Iranians may start attacking US bases in the region if the US is actively involved and openly helping Israel in its attacks.
Right. The question that we would like to ask you, do you think Iran is holding its horses right now because Israel wants a war? We spoke to the Israeli ambassador earlier today, and he told us that Israel had been preparing for this for decades. They felt and they had intelligence that Iran is close to being ready with a nuclear weapon, and that's why this was the best time to attack Iran's military leaders and nuclear facilities. They are ready for the retaliation, they're saying. They're ready for a long haul. So it seems that possibly Israel may be wanting a war. And if Iran retaliates, they would be just feeding into what possibly Israel and even US may be wanting them to do.
Israel certainly wants a war. I mean, what they have done is to start one. And they certainly wanted to expand, and they would love for it to lead to the US being openly involved in it. But the Iranian strategy of holding their horses, as you said, may not be working if it means that the Israelis then will have completely free reign to bomb anywhere they want in Iran for the next couple of weeks. That's a strategy that the Iranians pursued early on. They took a lot of hits in Syria without responding. But this is different because these are not just attacks on Iran, it's on the Iranian capital. The Israelis are bombing apartment buildings because one person lives there that they want to get to, and they're killing scores of people in those apartment buildings. So it is very difficult to see that the Iranians, if they do have the capacity to retaliate, would argue or calculate that it's better for them to show restraint in this type of a scenario.
Right. Could you describe the challenge for Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and what was the possibility of Iran choking the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, the Iranians certainly would have the capacity of creating challenges there. We've seen, for instance, how the Houthis, without mining the Red Sea, have been able to choke it off because of the manner in which they were shooting anti-ship missiles. And this would, they don't even have to hit the ships. The ships simply wouldn't go through. It wouldn't be worth the risk. It wouldn't be worth the insurance cost. But that is a scenario that only would happen once there actually is a full-blown war between the United States and Iran. Because if the Iranians do this, they will invite direct American attacks on Iranian soil. So I don't see them doing it unless those attacks already are taking place.
Right. In terms of the oil prices, there is a major worry, and we saw oil prices jumping almost 9 to 12% on the back of worries about a larger Middle East war and what will it do to all the oil shipping lines as well. Do you think Iran may want to send a message to the international community, make them uncomfortable by shutting off, closing the Strait of Hormuz? Can they do that unilaterally?
They can, but it comes at great risk. And it's one of those scenarios in which it's one of those tools that I think they would only employ if they're already in a state of all-out war. They are now in an all-out war with Israel, but they're not in an all-out war with the United States. So the question is, would they go in this direction and virtually guarantee that the U.S. would enter the war fully? And there's not a lot of indications that they would do this. What they have stated is that they would target American bases if the United States is openly helping Israel in its offensive attacks. And even if that is happening to a certain extent, the Iranians may want to have some plausible deniability and pretend that that is not taking place, because ultimately they know it is the Israeli aim to get Iran into a war with the U.S., and they were going to be careful to avoid that trap.
Right. What's your understanding of the kind of damage that has been caused to the Iranian military, their nuclear facilities, and what is the current capacity? If you had to compare the military capacities of Iran and Israel right now, and Israel, we have to keep in mind, is getting US help constantly. So where is Iran in this power balance?
Well, Iran's capacity, of course, is not one that matches that of Israel. But what Iran did have through its missiles, and may still have, is an ability to inflict a severe cost on the Israelis that could make it extremely painful and costly for the Israelis to go forward in this direction. Now, whether that capacity has been destroyed or not remains to be seen. What we're seeing here with them not doing anything on that front may very well simply be because of the high-level personnel that have been killed, and the Iranians need to regroup before they can do anything. Within a week, I think we should have a clearer answer to that question. My apologies, I really do have to run now, but thank you so much.
All right, Trita Parsi, thank you very much for joining us on the program. It was indeed a pleasure talking to you, and of course, a very grave situation there in the Middle East. Time for a short break, but coming up on the other side, we discuss the possible reasons behind the crash of Air India's Boeing 787 Dreamliner in Ahmedabad. You're watching Global Lens. 241 people have been confirmed dead after Air India's Boeing 787 Dreamliner plane crashed near Ahmedabad in India on the 12th of June. Only one person survived the crash and is receiving treatment. Grieving families await answers as investigators comb through the wreckage of the plane. The Aviation Ministry has confirmed that one black box with flight data and cockpit voice recorder has been recovered. CCTV footage revealed that the flight crashed 59 seconds after taking off with its landing gear still deployed. US authorities have said that 787 fleet will not be grounded as of now and say the investigation is at a preliminary stage. It is too early to say what may have caused the crash. The US is sending a joint team that includes members from the Federal Aviation Administration, Boeing and GE to India to join the probe. UK is also sending a team of experts to assist the probe into the crash which killed 52 British nationals. This week's crash is the first fatal accident involving a Dreamliner. In 2013, two Boeing 787s suffered lithium-ion battery fires, one in the air, another on the ground. That prompted the FAA to ground every 787 for a few months. By April 2013, Boeing redesigned the battery system and the FAA approved its return to service. What could be the probable causes of the crash and what does it mean for Boeing's reputation? Joining us right now to discuss this is aeronautical engineer and test pilot Dr. Guy Gratton. He's also Associate Professor of Aviation and Environment at Cranfield University. Thank you for being with us, Professor Gratton. Let me start by asking you about the possible reason why this crash could have occurred. Some experts have said that it lost lift and the flap settings were wrongly set. Would you say that this may have actually caused the crash?
I would say that we just don't know yet. It's probably not lift the aircraft lost, but thrust. The evidence suggests that the engines were winding back and not providing the amount of thrust. That requires the pilot, while they try to resolve the thrust problem, to slow the aircraft down. And it does look like that was happening. But the videos we've got, they're inconclusive. I'm very reluctant to conclude that we know anything specifically about the flaps, but we do know that they did not raise the undercarriage when we'd have expected them to. We do know clearly that the aeroplane started to descend. And we do know that the pilot made a mayday call that indicated he believed to be losing thrust. So all of that, I think, is consistent with the engines failing to provide power in some way. What reason for that, we just don't know.
Some experts have said, Professor Gratton, that there may have been fuel contamination. But do you think that's something extremely rare?
Fuel contamination occurs. It shouldn't, because there are stringent tests at the airports to check the quality of the fuel. However, I think that is pure conjecture. And also, for a sudden loss of power on both engines from contamination, sounds to me quite unlikely.
What, according to you, from whatever information we have available right now, is the most probable cause of crash?
It is far too early to talk about most probable cause. The investigators, the Indians have professional investigators, and clearly they're going to be supported by the British and Americans. They will need to take their time to look at the wreckage, to go through the two recorders, to interview eyewitnesses, and start to pull together a picture from which they can determine cause. And far more importantly, they can determine the recommendations they can make as to how to prevent any similar accident happening in the future. And for the rest of us to conject about cause, quite honestly, it's irresponsible. Firstly, we don't have enough evidence to do it. And secondly, there are hundreds of bereaved families who are deeply distressed right now. Unsurprisingly, they're going to be online, they're going to be watching your program and looking at my website, looking for answers. And I think we have to be very careful about offering them if we're really not sure about that.
We know that Boeing, as well as the engine maker GE, will be assisting in the probe. What are some of the factors they will be looking at, and what are the questions that would be posed to them?
Well, clearly, this is very concerning for both Boeing and the engine manufacturer, because something went wrong, and it's very important to them that whatever happened never happens again. So they need to look very hard into this. I suspect one of the first areas of great interest is going to be what they can get from the cockpit voice recorder, because by hearing what the captain and his first officer were saying to each other, they will get a very good idea of what in the cockpit was believed to be going wrong, and the descriptions as they went through it of what actions those two pilots took to try and resolve the situation. And I think that's probably one of the first things everybody is going to be interested in. Further from that, of course, the flight data recorder will have in the order of 1,000 parameters of information about how everything significant on the aeroplane was functioning. And they will start to be able to see from that what was the cause of the undercarriage not going up, what was the cause of the engines apparently losing power. And from this, they can start to piece together a picture of the events that led to this awful tragedy.
And India will be heading the probe, but investigators from the US and UK will also be assisting the Indian team. What kind of role will these investigators play, and how long will it take for them to give a preliminary analysis?
So, yes, so the Indian authorities are investigating. They will be clearly in the lead on this. NTSB are supporting, as are the British Air Accident Investigation Branch, who have announced they're sending a multidisciplinary team to support in India. The Americans and British, of course, have got access to a lot of technology. The Americans have got access to Boeing. So that will help a lot in supporting the Indian team in understanding what was going on within the aeroplane. In terms of timescales, yes, for a full report to take 2 years or even more is not that unusual, simply because there is so much evidence, there is so much to learn, and there may well be what appear to be tangential recommendations to be made, for example, about crash survivability. Was nothing to do with the cause of the accident, but is important, and that can take time. However, what I would expect is, because this is so serious and so visible, I think we are likely to get interim announcements, perhaps in 30 days, maybe even faster than that, of what is initially being found in the lead up to the eventual full report. And I think I mean, certainly from your viewpoint as a journalist, I would be probably asking the Indian authorities when that is going to be, because that's going to be very important.
And what are some of the questions does this kind of an incident pose for an airline?
I would tend not to worry about the fact that they've been taken over by Tata, because the aviation regulator will regulate Air India in exactly the same way, whoever owns it. And that is necessarily of an extremely high standard, and Air India's safety reputation actually is very good. The initial actions by the Air India board are entirely appropriate, but right now they don't know, none of us know what's happened here. So I think in the longer term, what is important to monitor is Air India's response to any recommendations that are made, the causes as we believe they come out for the aircraft, and whether they and their parent company are adequately resourcing them. Most importantly of all, rolling out any safety recommendations to make quite sure that a tragedy like this never happens again, because otherwise it becomes even worse than it is now.
And what does this mean for Boeing and its reputation going ahead?
Well, Boeing has been a troubled company for some years. The 737-8 MAX accidents, of course, are very public, and there's a lot been said about Boeing's corporate culture and how it contributed to that. Now, we hope that Boeing have been putting right what has gone wrong in the past. And certainly the Boeing 787 has been relatively a very trouble-free aeroplane. This is, in 14 years service, the first major accident of a 787. So without doubt, this is going to be putting pressure onto Boeing. It is, of course, totally unsurprising that their share price would drop after an accident like this. But I think that if we see Boeing continue to support the investigation, themselves implementing any safety recommendations, then and continuing to progress and learn the lessons that they were learned from the 737-8 MAX disasters, then you would hope that Boeing will continue to be heading in the direction of returning to be the manufacturer of amazing engineering products that certainly was their historical position.
All right, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Lens right here on CNBC TV 18 Prime. We will be back same place, same time tomorrow. Stay tuned.